Before CG took over Hollywood, entire space battles were filmed using physical models suspended under studio lights. These weren't toys. They were precision-built miniatures that created the illusion of galaxies far, far away. And today, some of those surviving builds are worth more than luxury homes. Jedi Starfighter Hero Filming Miniature Star Wars Episode 2: Attack of the Clones. When production began on Episode 2 in the early 2000s, the film industry was standing at the edge of a major technological shift. Computer-generated imagery was advancing rapidly, and many studios were abandoning practical effects entirely. But Industrial Light and Magic, the visual effects division founded by George Lucas, still believed that physical miniatures captured light in ways digital rendering could not yet replicate. The Jedi Starfighter Hero Filming Miniature was built specifically for close-up and high-detail space sequences involving Obi-Wan Kenobi. This was not a background model rushed through production. It was a precision-crafted hero asset. The body was constructed using layered resin components reinforced internally for rig mounting. Surface panels were individually sculpted and assembled to create subtle dimensional depth. Every seam, rivet line, and mechanical recess was intentionally exaggerated just enough so it would read correctly under harsh studio lighting. The paint process alone took weeks. Artists applied multiple passes of metallic base coats followed by hand-weathered detailing to simulate micro-abrasions from space travel. Heat scoring was airbrushed around engine ports. Panel lines were darkened manually to enhance shadow contrast during motion control photography. Even the cockpit canopy was engineered to interact with light realistically, preventing reflections from breaking the illusion of scale. During filming, the miniature was mounted on a motion control arm inside a controlled effects stage. Each camera pass required recalibrating lights to simulate distant stars, engine flares, and planetary reflections. What audiences see on screen is not a digital creation layered afterward. It is a physical object moving through real light, captured frame by frame. Private valuations for comparable prequel-era hero filming miniatures have reached into the mid-six figures, which places the Jedi Starfighter Hero filming miniature at approximately $200,000. Naboo Royal Starship Filming Miniature Star Wars Episode 1: The Phantom Menace. When audiences first saw Queen Amidala's silver cruiser glide across the screen in 1999, it looked almost unreal. The mirror-like surface reflected entire environments as it descended toward Tatooine. Many assumed it was entirely computer-generated. It was not. The Naboo Royal Starship filming miniature was one of the most technically demanding builds of the prequel trilogy. Unlike battle-worn military ships, this vessel required a flawless, high-gloss chrome finish that could withstand extreme close-up photography. Achieving that effect was extraordinarily difficult. The surface could not show fingerprints, dust, or uneven paint texture. Even the smallest imperfection would destroy the illusion of scale. To solve this, ILM constructed the model with ultra-smooth composite materials and applied a vacuum metallized chrome coating. Similar to techniques used in automotive concept cars, the ship was built in multiple scales, but the hero miniature used for beauty passes featured intricate panel segmentation that subtly broke up reflections under studio lighting. Without those micro panel lines, the model would have looked like a toy. Filming the miniature required controlled lighting environments designed to simulate planetary reflections. Instead of relying on digital compositing alone, physical light rigs were positioned around the model to create moving reflections that felt natural as the camera passed by. The result is why the ship still looks convincing decades later. Unlike warships from the original trilogy, prequel miniatures were produced in smaller quantities and far fewer survived. Chrome-finished hero models are especially rare because of how fragile the surface treatment can be over time. Comparable high-end prequel hero miniatures have been privately valued in the upper six-figure range. For a prequel-era hero miniature of this caliber, the market doesn't treat it lightly. Its estimated value lands around $350,000. TIE Fighter Hero Filming Miniature from Star Wars: A New Hope. When the first TIE fighters screamed across the screen in 1977, their movement felt aggressive and mechanical in a way no spacecraft had before. That realism came from physical engineering, not computers. The TIE Fighter Hero filming miniature was built at Industrial Light and Magic during a time when visual effects were still being invented from scratch. Unlike the smooth chrome of Naboo's cruiser, this model embraced sharp geometry and stark contrast. The spherical cockpit pod was carefully balanced to maintain structural integrity while suspended from motion control rigs. The vertical solar array wings were reinforced internally with lightweight metal frameworks to prevent warping during repeated filming sessions. Each wing panel had subtle texture added so it would not appear flat under studio lighting. The surface paint was intentionally minimal. ILM artists understood that these ships were mass-produced Imperial machines, so they avoided heavy weathering. Instead, they focused on creating slight tonal variation to prevent the black surfaces from absorbing too much light. If the paint were too dark, the miniature would lose dimensional depth on camera. If it were too glossy, reflections would break scale illusion. During filming of the Death Star trench sequences, these miniatures were mounted on computer-controlled arms that moved along pre-programmed paths. Cameras tracked them repeatedly, sometimes requiring dozens of passes for a single composite shot. Every engine glow, every laser flash, and every explosion was layered through practical effects photography. The miniature was not a background element, it was the centerpiece of some of the most iconic shots in cinema history. High-end valuations for confirmed Hero TIE Fighter miniatures from 1977 have reached into the upper six figures and beyond. That level of craftsmanship and historical importance pushes the market higher than most expect. The current valuation sits near $600,000. Podracer Hero filming miniature from Star Wars Episode I, The Phantom Menace. The Boonta Eve Classic was one of the most ambitious sequences ever attempted at the time. While much of the pod race blended practical and digital effects, several high-detail hero miniatures were built to capture realism that early CGI alone could not achieve. Among them was the Podracer Hero filming miniature representing Anakin Skywalker's engine assembly. This was not a simple model built for background motion. The engines were constructed with layered mechanical components, exposed cabling, and internal structure designed to withstand repeated rig mounting. Every intake vent, turbine blade, and heat-scored exhaust port was sculpted with exaggerated micro-detail, so that when filmed at high speed, the illusion of massive scale would hold. Unlike the symmetrical military ships of the Empire, this build had asymmetry and improvisation built into its design. Surface paint included oil staining, carbon scoring, and metallic chipping to reflect the rough desert environment of Tatooine. The cockpit tether cables were engineered to flex naturally during motion control passes, so the ship would not appear rigid or toy-like on camera. During filming, the miniature was mounted against high-speed background plates and enhanced with practical debris elements. Dust bursts were shot separately and composited later, but the engines themselves were physically present, lit with real studio lamps to simulate sunlight reflecting off desert sand. That natural light interaction is what gives the race sequence its grounded feeling even decades later. Collectors specializing in late-era ILM builds have placed comparable hero racing miniatures firmly in the seven-figure discussion, which places the Podracer Hero filming miniature at approximately $800,000. A TAT stop-motion filming miniature from Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. When The Empire Strikes Back introduced the Battle of Hoth, audiences had never seen mechanical walkers move with such weight and realism. That illusion came from painstaking frame-by-frame photography using the AT-AT stop-motion filming miniature. These were not simple static models. Each walker was built with an internal armature that allowed controlled articulation of the legs. The skeletal framework had to support the outer shell while remaining stable enough to hold incremental poses during stop-motion animation. If even one joint shifted unintentionally between frames, the entire shot would need to be reset. The exterior was layered with mechanical plating, recessed panel lines, and surface weathering to simulate cold exposure and battlefield wear. Subtle frost detailing was applied to certain versions used in close-up shots to reinforce the Hoth environment. The cockpit head section was detachable in some builds, allowing interior shots to be filmed separately and composited later. Filming required extreme precision. Animators adjusted the miniature millimeter by millimeter, capturing single frames before repositioning the legs again. What appears as smooth marching movement on screen is actually the result of thousands of individual photographs stitched together. The sense of mass comes from gravity interacting with a real object, not from a digital simulation. Because of their technical complexity, iconic status, and scarcity, confirmed production used AT-AT miniatures from The Empire Strikes Back have entered serious collector territory. A survivor from the Hoth battle doesn't trade quietly in the collector world. Pieces of this magnitude command figures in the range of $1,200,000. Slave Eye Hero filming miniature from Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back. When Boba Fett's ship first appeared on screen, it didn't move like any other spacecraft in science fiction. It rotated vertically, hovered with precision, and carried a quiet menace that matched its pilot. That presence came from the Slave Eye Hero filming miniature, engineered at Industrial Light and Magic for The Empire Strikes Back. Unlike traditional horizontal starfighters, this design required a completely different rigging approach. The miniature had to transition between vertical landing orientation and horizontal flight configuration without breaking the illusion of gravity. Internal mounting points were carefully concealed so the motion control arm would never appear in reflective surfaces. The ship's curved hull demanded flawless paintwork because any uneven reflection would expose its true size. Surface detailing was dense and layered. Panel lines were carved deeply to maintain shadow definition under bright studio lighting. Battleware was applied selectively, with chipping around the hull edges and burn marks near thruster vents. The cockpit canopy was tinted to prevent studio reflections from revealing camera equipment while still allowing interior lighting to glow subtly during flight shots. For close-up sequences, the Hero version featured enhanced mechanical detail not present on background models. The seismic charge launcher port, side cannons, and rear thrusters were all individually finished to withstand magnified photography. Each pass through the camera required recalibration of light intensity to maintain the illusion of a massive, heavily armored vessel. Original trilogy hero miniatures tied directly to major characters carry a premium beyond technical craftsmanship. Boba Fett's ship is not just a vehicle, it is part of one of the most mythologized characters in cinematic history. That association elevates its collector status dramatically. Confirmed production-used hero miniatures of this caliber have entered deep seven-figure valuation territory, which places the Slave Eye Hero filming miniature at approximately $1,800,000. Death Star Trench Hero Filming Miniature, section from Star Wars A New Hope. The climactic trench run in A New Hope was not created inside a computer. It was built by hand, stretched across massive tables inside a warehouse, and filmed one pass at a time using motion control cameras. Among the most valuable surviving elements from that sequence are the Death Star Trench Hero filming miniature sections. These were not small decorative pieces. The trench surface was constructed in long modular panels, each packed with layered greeblies, mechanical plating, recessed structures, and tiny architectural components sourced from model kits. Every surface detail was intentionally exaggerated so that when the camera flew inches above it, the illusion of scale would transform a few feet of model into miles of Imperial machinery. The panels were mounted horizontally while cameras traveled at controlled speeds above them. Multiple passes were required for each shot, with separate lighting setups simulating distant starlight, laser impacts, and explosion flashes. Smoke and pyrotechnic elements were filmed independently and composited later, but the trench itself was entirely physical. What makes surviving trench sections extraordinary is their direct connection to one of the most iconic sequences in film history. This is the moment that defined the franchise. The final proton torpedo shot, the narrow escape, the explosion that reshaped blockbuster cinema, all of it depended on these physical builds. Because many trench components were dismantled, repurposed, or damaged during filming, intact hero-grade sections tied to original photography are exceptionally rare. They represent not only Star Wars history, but the birth of modern visual effects methodology. High-end collectors and institutions place enormous value on confirmed screen-used trench sections of significant size and provenance. For a fragment of the most iconic space battle ever filmed, the market moves into another league entirely. Valuations for a confirmed hero trench section reach as high as $2,500,000. Imperial Star Destroyer 8-foot filming miniature from Star Wars: A New Hope. The opening shot of A New Hope changed cinema forever. A small Rebel blockade runner drifts across the screen, and then an impossibly massive wedge-shaped warship follows, stretching frame after frame until it dominates the image. That moment was achieved using the Imperial Star Destroyer 8-foot filming miniature, one of the largest and most complex models Industrial Light and Magic had ever constructed at the time. The miniature measured roughly 8 feet in length and was built with a rigid internal skeleton to prevent flexing under its own weight. The outer hull was assembled from thousands of individually applied surface components. Model kit parts were repurposed to create intricate mechanical textures, giving the illusion of vast industrial infrastructure layered across the ship's surface. Every square inch was densely detailed because the camera would pass extremely close to the hull during filming. Lighting this model was a challenge of its own. The scale demanded careful balancing of shadow and highlight so that the ship would not appear miniature under high-intensity studio lights. ILM technicians engineered tiny fiber optic lighting throughout the surface to simulate windows, command decks, and internal systems. Each glowing point had to be precisely calibrated to avoid overwhelming the shot. The filming process required motion control systems that were revolutionary for the era. The camera glided slowly across the length of the ship while the model remained stationary, creating the illusion of colossal scale. Multiple passes were captured for engines, surface lighting, and starfields, later composited into a seamless image that still holds up decades later. This miniature is not just a prop, it is a cornerstone of cinematic history. It represents the moment audiences realized that science fiction could feel physically real. Surviving examples of this size and screen usage are virtually irreplaceable, and their cultural weight extends far beyond collector markets. If a confirmed production used 8-foot Star Destroyer miniature were to enter private hands, valuation discussions would immediately reach into the multi-million-dollar range, which places the Imperial Star Destroyer 8-foot filming miniature at approximately $3,200,000. R2-D2 Effects filming miniature unit from Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. Not every version of R2-D2 was a full-sized rolling prop. For complex exterior shots, explosions, and space sequences, Industrial Light and Magic constructed specialized miniature units. Unlike the larger on-set droids operated by performers, this version was engineered for camera work. The dome was cast with crisp mechanical panel lines so that even under magnification it retained depth and realism. The body featured miniature vents, data ports, and layered surface panels that would hold shadow detail when lit at extreme angles. Because the character is small and cylindrical, scale illusion becomes difficult. If the proportions are even slightly off, the audience senses it immediately. ILM technicians compensated by exaggerating certain features just enough so that when filmed through motion control passes, the miniature would read as full size on screen. The dome was often mounted separately for rotational shots. Internal mechanisms allowed subtle movement to simulate awareness and personality. Engine lighting, sparks, and environmental reflections were captured practically, not digitally. In scenes involving explosions or damage, separate versions were constructed and destroyed, making surviving intact filming miniatures exceptionally rare. R2-D2 is not a secondary ship or background vehicle. He is one of the central characters of the saga. That distinction elevates any confirmed production-used miniature dramatically. When composite R2D2 units assembled from original production parts have appeared at auction, they have shattered expectations. One such unit crossed the block for nearly $3 million, and a confirmed, fully intact R2D2 effects filming miniature unit would command approximately $2,700,000. Millennium Falcon 5-foot hero filming miniature from Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back. The Millennium Falcon was never meant to look elegant. It was designed to feel used, modified, and mechanically alive. To achieve that realism, Industrial Light and Magic constructed a 5-foot hero filming miniature that became the definitive version of the ship during The Empire Strikes Back. This was not a simplified background asset. The 5-foot scale allowed extreme surface complexity. Thousands of kit-bashed components were layered across the hull to create depth, shadow variation, and the illusion of endless mechanical systems beneath the plating. Every docking ring, sensor dish, landing gear recess, and exhaust vent was hand-assembled. There is no smooth surface on this model. It is entirely textured. The paintwork defined the Falcon's identity. ILM artists applied multiple layers of off-white base coats, then selectively removed sections to reveal darker primer tones beneath. Oil streaking, carbon scoring, and grime were added manually to simulate years of smuggling runs. When cameras passed within inches of the hull, those micro details prevented the model from ever appearing small. The ship was mounted to motion control rigs that allowed sweeping banking maneuvers and slow, majestic flybys. Multiple lighting passes were required to simulate engine glow and cockpit illumination. Because the Falcon was frequently filmed at close range, the hero miniature carried more refinement than nearly any other spacecraft model from the trilogy. Unlike many original models that were dismantled or modified between films, the 5-foot Hero Falcon became one of the most recognizable physical artifacts in science fiction history. It is not simply a filming model, it is the physical embodiment of one of the most beloved ships ever put on screen. When comparable Falcon miniatures have entered the market, bidding has escalated rapidly into multi-million-dollar territory. A confirmed screen-matched 5-foot hero version tied directly to Empire would not quietly change hands. It would detonate the auction room. Its market reality sits around $3,500,000.